Hello and welcome. I'm Alexander Mostovoy, board-certified clinical thermologist and the founder of Thermography Clinic. And today we have a special guest, Dr. Christine Horner, is a board-certified and nationally recognized surgeon, author, expert in natural medicine, and relentless champion for women's health. She spearheaded legislation in the 1990s that made it mandatory that insurance companies pay for breast reconstruction following mastectomy. She's the author of Waking the Warrior Goddess, Dr. Christine Horner's program to protect against and fight breast cancer, winner of the Independent Book Publishers Award in 2006 for Best Book in Health, Medicine, and Nutrition, and the author of the recently released Radiant Health, Ageless Beauty, Dr. Horner's 30-day program to extraordinary health and longevity. Welcome, Dr. Horner. Pleasure to have you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So let me ask you one thing is, why breast cancer?
Why do I have a special interest in breast cancer? Yeah, well, so my mom developed breast cancer when I was in college. And so that got me interested in being involved in it. So actually, when I started my plastic surgery residency, then I had a special interest in doing breast reconstruction, for breast cancer patients. And then my mom got a second breast cancer that showed up on the opposite breast and went through, the treatments again. And then about 5 years later, she then developed, even though it was a stage 1 disease, she developed metastasis and she died like 9 months later. So that was a huge kind of pivotal moment in my life where my mom was doing everything Western medicine told her to do. And she had stage 1 disease and she died, from it. So I felt like, well, everything I'd learned, as far as what women are supposed to do with their mammograms and breast exams and all that kind of stuff, It doesn't really work, for everybody. And then I'm looking at my own practice and I'm noticing my patients are getting younger and younger. And finally, I'm doing breast reconstruction on women in their 20s. And that's when I thought, something's like terribly wrong here. And so I just started going through the medical research. This is about 20 years ago, and had no idea what I was going to find because I thought pharmaceutical companies sponsored, all the research, and there really wasn't a conversation in our culture about natural health. But even 20 years ago, I found thousands of studies that showed exactly why we have a breast cancer epidemic and prostate and colon cancer and kind of ill health in general. And it's all diet and lifestyle related, really. And the conclusions are that 95% of cases of breast cancer could be prevented through, proper diet and lifestyle. So I ended up quitting my practice, and my whole mission really is teaching people about how to become and stay healthy naturally and avoid getting sick.
So naturally, just like some of us, you do think that breast cancer is a preventable disease after all.
Yeah, like they say, 95% of the cases would be preventable. So we have, to me, it's great news because we have so much control over our health. And in my Western medical training, most of the time we'd say, matter of bad luck or bad genes or whatever. And it's like, no, you have a lot of control over it. So that's the good news, is that you can really prevent it in the first place. Or if you do develop it, there's things that you can do that can really significantly improve your survival statistics.
So what do you think is wrong with the existing kind of early detection paradigm?
Well, there's a lot wrong. If we look at just using mammography, which is what Western medicine has said, we just do mammograms. Well, now here, 25, 30 years later, we've got these really long-term studies that have been done that show that, the things that we've been telling women about mammograms aren't exactly true, that there's all sorts of problems with them. And they've found that, for instance, they overdiagnose, telling you that you've got something significant going on and even causing you to have treatments when they would be unnecessary, or they tell you, hey, it looks like you need to have a biopsy. And so women go in and have a biopsy wrong, and 60% of them turn out to be benign. So it's kind of like, well, 80% of them, it's a wrong thing to tell, women to do. That's a pretty bad statistic. And so really, and the radiation is something that we know that is accumulative and can contribute to developing breast cancer. And so this is really not an ideal test that we have. And in fact, in Switzerland, the Swiss Medical Board decided to phase out the mammography program because they felt it was unethical. Now that we've got these studies that show that the test can cause more harm than good. There's other, non-invasive technologies that don't use radiation that I'm way more excited about. And the research shows if we do a combination of multiple tests, because no test is perfect, then that gives us the very best result.
Such as,
so we're segueing yes to. So you and I are both passionate about a technology called thermography. And I was introduced to that, I don't know, maybe 17 years ago or something like that. But it's simply what it is an infrared picture. So it's an infrared camera. It's just a picture, so it doesn't cause any harm. And it's measuring the surface temperatures of the skin. And so we found that it can be very helpful for us throughout the whole body to show areas maybe of inflammation or infection, and definitely very great for musculoskeletal disorders. But for the breast area, we found it to be particularly useful as a preventative tool. Really, there's no preventative tool other than thermography. And what it will show us is that we can start to see some changes with increased inflammation or heat patterns that are different from what the opposite side of the breast would be, which then increases our level of concern, we'll say. But we can see these changes years before there's any cancer that forms. And the whole idea for me is that you find these things when they're in a completely preventable form. And we've found through doing some pilot studies here that if we educate women about diet and lifestyle and start them on some nutritional supplements, that usually within 3 months, if we rescan them, all of those kind of early warning signs have gone away. So we're interrupting that progression to going on to getting cancer. And thermography is the only thing that really allows us to see that.
So let's talk about prevention, because we're not just passionate about thermography, but really we're passionate about disease prevention.
Yes.
And it's all about education. There's a lot of information that women get. One day coffee is good for you. Next day you have to have 2 glasses of wine. The day after it's 1 glass of wine.
Right.
There's a lot of disinformation, and
yes.
I get that, and I'm sure you get that from your patients as well.
Yes.
Who will say, I just don't know what to believe. So
right.
much. What
yeah.
would you say is, I know you have a program that you help women deal with prevention as well as the ones
that
have breast cancer, which is probably very similar in some ways. What are the most kind of important things that you want to educate women about?
Sure. So first of all, the book that I wrote called Waking the Warrior Goddess, and it's subtitled Dr. Christine Horner's Program to Protect Against and Fight Breast Cancer. And the whole reason I wrote that book is exactly what you're saying. You can get on the internet, you can find anything, you find all this conflicting data, and what's a person to know, what to do. So what I did with my book is to go through the medical research and really determine what the facts are, as far as, the studies are showing the things that you can do to lower your risk. And that includes 2 different categories, which is avoiding the things that we know that are contributing to ill health, including breast cancer, and then the things that we know that are highly protective. And so my book is meant to be kind of a guidebook, so people can get based on research. So of course, diet is extremely important, and we find that, eating burgers and fries in the standard American diet is the thing that's going to give you every kind of disease, including breast cancer. Eating mostly an organic plant-based diet is considered the healthiest. Most everybody's heard these things now. It's not like this is, new stuff. Everything that increases your risk is the same thing that increases ill health in general. So, being a couch potato, having lots of stress, not getting enough rest, being in toxic relationships, these things all increase your risk. Whereas the opposite of that is if you're eating a really great diet, you're exercising regularly, you're getting plenty of rest. I always encourage people to do an effective stress reducing technique like meditation, Tai Chi. So this helps to reduce stress, which we know is a huge kind of cofactor with developing breast cancer. And then relationships. So it turns out, I mean, fascinating research where it shows that of all the things that affect our health and longevity, more than diet, more than smoking, and more than genetics, is our emotions, and actually the very specific emotion about feeling loved and supported. So we as human beings are wired to feel loved and supported, and if we don't get that, then that's a very kind of toxic effect to our bodies. And so whenever we feel these emotions, there's all these kinds of molecules that are released that have effects on our immune system, have effects on our DNA. So when I read that research years ago, I had a tendency to be kind of a hermit, and working. And I thought, you know what, the most important thing is being with my friends and nurturing, my relationships. And I think most people know that, like when they have been out with their friends having a good time, you get home, it's like you feel so great, because you've had that interaction. But it turns out we're actually wired for that, and it's the most important aspect of our health.
I couldn't agree with you more that the psycho-emotional component, which is probably the most important thing, not just with breast cancer, but with any kind of disease prevention, is really not even part of the medical model.
Yeah.
We're looking for what's wrong with people rather than what's right with people, right? We're all trained to look for problems. And speaking about that, what's your kind of idea, especially in the last 5-10 years? Everyone is talking about genetic predisposition to cancer, to breast cancer, with BRCA1, BRCA2 genes, doing double mastectomies. Guide us there. What's your opinion there?
Sure. Well, my first impulse when I started reading about this, I'm just like, our approach is just completely crazy, right? So if you look at Western approach, if you look at these families of the BRCA1 gene mutations from 100 years ago, the incidence of breast cancer in those families was 1/3 of what it is today. And it's like, well, why is it so much higher now? Well, guess what? The same things that increase the risk of breast cancer in a normal person are the exact same things that increase the risk in someone with a BRCA gene mutation.
Right.
So they're more affected by these things too. So common sense says, okay, if they clean up their diet, they're doing all the lifestyle things that are recommended, the stress reduction, all that kind of stuff, they're going to drastically lower the risk. And then there's really fascinating research that's been done where once we mapped out the human genome, one of the best or biggest areas of research is it seems that they always are testing, various different foods or supplements or whatever, and seeing what the effect is on our genes. What genes are being shut off, what genes are being turned on. And so there's a lot of research that's been done looking at what various different food supplements, that kind of thing, that has a direct effect on the BRCA1 gene. And so they found a number of things which we know are, completely healthy for us anyway. So things like from the cruciferous vegetable family, the indole-3 carbinol has a direct effect on the BRCA1 gene. Melatonin, which, if you go to bed at the proper time, you'll get your spike in melatonin between midnight and 2 o'clock, which you don't want to miss, because if you do, the consequences are really spectacular with increasing your risk of all sorts of different kinds of diseases, including breast cancer. Omega-3 fatty acids are another one that have, a direct effect on it. Vitamin D3, and this is another one where like the research on vitamin D has just been, exploding, and we're finding that it is kind of a direct linear relationship to what your levels are and what your incidence of disease is. So when they're low, we have an increase in all sorts of different kinds of chronic diseases, and when you get it into a therapeutic range, which is kind of anywhere between, I like to push it up to 50 to 70, but they'll say, 40 to 60, but nanograms per deciliter. But what they found is that vitamin D has an effect on the BRCA1 gene, which makes it act less mutated. So we all have a BRCA genes. That's actually their tumor suppression genes. And they also are involved in the DNA repair mechanism. So, our DNA is getting bombarded all the time by, toxins and injuries, and we have these repair mechanisms that are in place that help to repair it. But if the repair mechanisms aren't working well, which is what happens with the BRCA gene mutation, then the DNA can't repair itself very well, and if mistakes can occur in the DNA, and usually that translates into an increased risk of cancers. Now, very fascinatingly, they did this double-blinded placebo-controlled study in Europe with 100 BRCA gene women, and this researcher said, okay, the mineral selenium, which costs nothing, is found in our soil, and they found that it has a relationship to decreasing the incidences of cancers, but selenium is involved in the DNA repair mechanism. So this researcher just hypothesized, okay, if we gave women with a BRCA gene mutation selenium, then potentially it's something that could help to lower the risk of cancer. And so they set this up as a double-blinded placebo-controlled, which is the best type of studies that we have for getting accurate information. Half the women got 200 micrograms of selenium a day, and the other got placebo. And at the end of 2 years, they found absolutely fascinating information. So one was they took the blood from the women before they started the study, and they found that there was an increased amount of DNA fragments. These are broken, sections of DNA that didn't get repaired. And so after the 2 years, when they took the blood, they found that the ones that had been on selenium, that the number of DNA fragments that they had in their blood was completely normal, where the other ones, were not at all. And then in addition to that, they just found clinically that there was a really significant reduction in the incidence of breast cancer in the group that took the selenium. So, there's a few supplements that you can take that target that BRCA1 gene, making it less mutated and kind of, drastically kind of targeting, kind of genetically to drastically lower your risk. So I think we can get, the incidence down to normal by knowing this information where we're, really working with the diet and lifestyle, and the supplements. And the other thing that makes absolutely no sense about, doing double mastectomies is that the BRCA1 gene is not specific for increasing breast cancer. It increases all sorts of different kinds of cancers, including melanoma. Like, what, are you going to shave all your skin off? No. It increases pancreatic cancer. Are you going to take your pancreas out? No. So it makes much more sense, like, you want to protect your whole body from this, genetic mutation, and we know very specifically that there are ways to do that. So for me, going in there and hacking out organs is not like the best and only way to do it. I think it's fine to do that if a woman's like really scared about it and it kind of incapacitates her, which is like Angelina Jolie, felt that way. Well, then there's a place, for doing surgery. But you don't have to do that. I mean, you can keep your organs, you just clean up your diet and lifestyle, take some, targeted supplements, use thermography, as an example, and ultrasounds to be able to monitor things. And then if there's any change that you see, you can catch it right away and be able to, get on top of it. And, the other thing, just to bash mammography a little bit more, is that they found that women with the BRCA gene, that if you do mammography on these women, because it just, causes damage to the DNA, and they don't have these repair mechanisms that work very well, it astronomically increases the risk of breast cancer. So they found if they've had any kind of radiological examination at age 30 or younger, that they have a 90% increased incidence of breast cancer. I mean, insane. So to me, it's like, there's other tests that we can be doing that's not going to cause that kind of harm.
Well, I'm glad that BRCA1 or 2 genes are not causing migraines, because the cure for that would be decapitation.
Oh, there you go.
But, so we know that, unfortunately, women, maybe not all women, but many women who are either, like you mentioned, maybe anxious or scared about cancer, or have had traumatic experiences with family history. Mm-hmm. Medicine rules by fear.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Right. And so the information that we're trying to kind of bring and educate gets kind of pushed aside when someone is faced with their internal fear, or when someone comes into their life and says, we found something.
Right.
No, we want you to come back. We're not sure what we found, but we want you to come back.
Yeah.
How would you address that? Because there are a lot of women that get this over a period of their lifetime. And they go home, and of course they're stressed, and they're not asleep. What if I have it?
Yeah, right. No, I mean, that's absolutely true. So there's so much fear, and there's an interesting study that was done on women who had a false positive, meaning that with mammographies, meaning that a mammogram would say, hey, you've got something there that looks suspicious, and you need to get a biopsy done with it. Well, it turns out that when they did psychological studies on these women and compared it to people who actually had breast cancer, that they had emotional disturbances that were equal to the people that had breast cancer 6 months later. So it's not like a minor thing, that we're scaring women, and we're, using technologies that, overdiagnose and so forth. So it's a tough thing to counteract. I mean, I've definitely seen that quite a bit, and it's very frustrating for me when somebody even may know that, hey, I can do these diet and lifestyle things, I can take these supplements, but when they are in the face of Western medicine like that scaring them, they just lose it all, and they're like, okay, whatever you want me to do. Yeah, so it's a really tough problem, and it kind of takes a strong constitution to kind of say, hey, I'm not going to go down your rabbit hole, and I'm going to think about this for myself, and so my thing is just being out there educating people all the time, so that little by little, it's going to have some impacts on people, so that they won't get sucked up into that system. Yeah.
So in terms of prevention, and again, when we're talking about breast cancer prevention, we're talking about generally prevention of disease.
Yes.
What would you suggest kind of the most important things to avoid, and what would be that you would embrace to promote your health?
Sure. So, like I said before, eating burgers and fries and processed foods and sugar and high-fat diets, these are things that, increase your risk. Not getting enough rest, having a lot of stress in your life, not exercising, being in toxic relationships. Whereas the things that are highly preventable are, eating primarily a plant-based diet, and I recommend organic to avoid, all the chemicals, because we know there's a, association with that. Doing a minimum of like 30 minutes of brisk walking a day, drinking purified water, practicing an effective stress-reducing technique such as meditation. I practice transcendental meditation, but Tai Chi, Qigong, yoga, these are all things that can kind of train your system to not be so reactive, and you don't get as high a level of those stress hormones, which can be very damaging. And then nurturing your relationships. Like I said, it's a kind of an interesting concept, because a lot of people don't know about this one. And when I do coaching for women who actually have breast cancer, trying to heal from it, it's like, man, this is a time you have to be ruthless. I'm like, be ruthless about your relationships, because we have 7 billion people on the planet, so you got a lot of choices. And you just choose people that are loving and supportive. I mean, people who are toxic to you, don't have those people in your life, and I don't care if they're your relative, or whatever. It's like, you have to be ruthless about it, because it's the most important thing. Certain nutrients, super important. Vitamin D, we talked about it. There's almost, again, a direct linear relationship to how low your levels are and your risk of breast cancer. Some studies are showing if you get your levels up to a therapeutic range, it could reduce your risk by as much as 70%. It's just like one nutrient. So, and then a message I always have too is that it's incredibly simple to dramatically lower your risk. So when I did the research for my book, every single thing that I found that had a statistically significant influence in helping to protect against breast cancer, almost across the board, everything cut your risk in half. And then if you start combining two healthy things, they have synergistic effects with each other, so it multiplies up their protective effect. So there was a study showing green tea and turmeric, the Indian spice turmeric, both have many, many different anti-cancer effects. And so they found that if you consume them at the same time, either in a supplement or in a meal, that green tea would enhance the anti-cancer effects of turmeric by 3 times, and turmeric would enhance the anti-cancer effects of green tea by 8 times. So, you get this huge, multiplication. And so it's like no surprise, I think, when we're using thermography, for example, we've identified women that looked like they were at higher risk for developing future breast cancer. We coached them on diet and lifestyle, started them on several different nutritional supplements, which have unbelievable effects. And then 3 months later, when you scan them, it's like just unbelievable jaw-dropping improvements in their scans. So it's simple, It's like just a few simple things that you can do. You cut your risk in half, or even more. It's not hard to do, it's just encouraging news because we're kind of set up to be able to really protect ourselves quite easily.
That's great. Listen, I can't thank you enough. I'm sure that given enough time, we could sit here and talk for another 24 hours plus. And disease prevention and all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And I'd like you to promise me that maybe we can do another interview.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
Based, you're just a treasure of information.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
As I said, I'm inspired. I love your enthusiasm, and I want to tell the audience where to find you. Maybe you can have a few more meaningful relationships. www.drchristineHorner.com. That's Dr. Horner's website. Again, thank you very much for being with us.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Are you still dancing?
Oh my God, yes. I'll never give that up. I love dancing.
I've seen some YouTube videos years ago.
Okay.
You're incredible.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
It's like, anyway, maybe someday we'll have a dance.
That sounds wonderful.
Thanks again. Take care.
Okay, you're welcome. You're welcome.